Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Barbie, Greta Gerwig's feminist fantasia, and the pink half of the 2023 phenomenon known as Barbenheimer. It is a film about a doll's journey towards self-actualization, and it has absolutely no right to be as good as it is. Some of the themes we'll explore are how people can navigate the friend zone, whether men need romantic relationships more than women do, and whether identity confusion undermines relationships.
And fair warning, we'll be spoiling this movie today. So if you don't know that mini fridges only hold a six-pack and that patriarchy isn't about horses, then go ahead and watch this movie and come back. Okay, Eli, who are the key characters and couples in this movie?
There are lots of dolls and human characters in this film. The main characters in Barbie are Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, and Ken, played by Ryan Gosling. Both actors give shockingly committed performances. Barbie, also known as stereotypical Barbie, lives a life of bliss in the matriarchal utopia known as Barbieland. When offered the choice between the blue pill and the red pill, or in this case, between the stiletto and the Birkenstock, she eventually chooses the Birkenstock. Ken, whose professional and personal identity revolve around beach, has one aim in life: to be noticed and admired by Barbie. Barbieland is populated with many other Barbies and Kens, including Kate McKinnon's Weird Barbie and Issa Rae's President Barbie. Another of the Kens is played by Simu Liu, who's best known as Shang-Chi in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Where relevant, we'll distinguish the two main Kens by calling them Beach Ken and Rival Ken, as the two dolls compete for Barbie's attention and keep threatening to beach each other off. Alan, played by Michael Cera, fits into Ken's clothes, but he doesn't really have a home in the Barbie-Ken binary. As Barbie journeys to the real world, she encounters human characters, including Gloria, a Mattel employee who, by thinking dark thoughts while playing with her daughter's Barbie doll, inadvertently breaches the membrane separating the real world from Barbieland. Her teenage daughter, Sasha, believes that Barbie is not only harmful to girls and women, but also a fascist. Ruth Handler, the real-life creator of the Barbie doll, appears in this film as something of a secular saint. As Barbie struggles to figure out who she is, Ruth tells her she can be anything she wants. And then there's the CEO of Mattel, a nameless, bumbling, and sexist executive played by Will Ferrell. When he asks President Barbie to call him mother, she says, no thank you. So, Paul, those are the chess pieces. Are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
Oh my God, I will try. Here we go.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
On your mark. Get set. Go.
Stereotypical Barbie enjoys the matriarchal society of Barbieland, a fantastical place where women hold all positions of power, while Ken tries to impress her with his skills at beach. Barbie starts to have thoughts about death, and Weird Barbie advises her to travel to the real world to find the child playing with her. Barbie and Ken arrive in Venice Beach, which Ken loves, but causes Barbie to sense an undertone of violence. Barbie seeks out the mother-daughter duo, Gloria and Sasha, which were the origin of her existential crisis, while Ken discovers patriarchy and races back to Barbieland to install it. Mattel executives try to put Barbie back in the box, but Barbie escapes with Gloria and Sasha back to Barbieland. Upon returning, she discovers that the other Barbies have been brainwashed to accept submissive roles. Kicked out of her dream house, she schemes with the outcast dolls, Gloria and Sasha, to deprogram the Barbies and manipulate the Kens to resume fighting with each other, leading to an incredible dream ballet, but nevertheless causing them to forget to vote to enshrine patriarchy in the Constitution. The Barbies resolve to give the Kens and outcast dolls more of a role in society. Ken realizes he needs to find his own identity, and Barbie heads to the real world to feel the joys and sorrows of human existence.
Nice. 59 seconds. I thought you were going to give the final line of the movie and you were going to go to like 60.5.
I know. I saw the clock getting low and I made a pivot. I pivoted. Okay, tell me, what is your relationship to this movie?
I have two things I'd like to share. One is about how much some of this patriarchy stuff is really playing a role in the real world today. And I remembered going to a wedding a few years ago where the invitation was to Mr. and Mrs. Eli Finkel. And I was sort of disturbed by this. And I showed it to somebody else, somebody from a generation ahead of me. And he thought I was objecting to the fact that it said Mr. and not Doctor. And it didn't occur to me. What really was weird to me is that my wife is apparently Mrs. Eli Finkel. And I just didn't realize that that was still what we were doing these days.
I was told to like write all my letters that way as a kid.
Wow.
Right? Like that was how I was told to address the letters to like members of my family.
Yikes. Yeah, that's like this, you and I are still like living proof of this stuff. The other thing is much more personal. So arguably the climactic moment of the movie is, Barbie makes the decision to go to the real world, and that Billie Eilish song comes on. What Was I Made For? And it is so moving and beautiful.
It really is.
It won the Grammy for Song of the Year. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. But the reason why it has such a wallop for me is my dad and my daughter and I have attended the last 2 Billie concert tours, including the recent one where she performed that. And also, my dad and my daughter played. My dad played the keys, and my daughter sang it at an event at our synagogue, like a soup kitchen event for homeless and poor people in the area. So I have this tremendous sentimental attachment. And by the way, so does my daughter Nora. And when I told her I was recording this episode with you today, she said, I would like to record a little something about what that movie means to me, and we will include it at the end of this episode.
Cool. I've never met Greta Gerwig, and now she's from Sacramento. I live in Sacramento, so she feels like a hometown hero to me. But I have never felt so seen as a man living in the 21st century than I did when I saw this movie. Because, do I want to fight with Nerf weapons on a beach?
Oh, yeah.
I kind of do.
Yeah.
If left to my own devices, would I talk over the entirety of The Godfather? I might.
Yeah.
And importantly, have I ever played guitar at people?
Oh, yeah.
You had better believe it.
I want to push you around.
Now, did I play Matchbox 20? No. So I did a little informal poll of my friends. I have a number of guy friends that we've been friends since high school.
Yeah.
And many of them play guitar. And I was like, how many of you have played guitar at women?
Yeah.
And was it ever successful? And all of them had played guitar at women, and in only about a quarter of the cases was it ever successful. So there's a datum right there. But Greta Gerwig gets me in a deep and profound way. I salute you.
I do too. I also play guitar. I've also played guitar in the general direction of a woman that I was attracted to, and cannot claim that it contributed to success.
Yep.
But okay, this is not Greta Gerwig's only insight. What does the movie get right when we think about the nature of relationships?
Oh my God. Okay. I will kick it off here.
Please, yeah.
With I think, one of the things that's really fun and interesting, and this actually touches on a paper that came out really recently about whether romantic relationships in general provide more benefits and are more desired by men versus women.
Interesting.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so there's a new paper by Dr. Waring. It's really fascinating. But they basically make the argument in this paper that there's a lot of evidence that men need relationships more than women. Okay? And some of that evidence is like in the health domain, okay? So when men get into relationships, their health benefits more than women's health does.
Yep.
When relationships break up, the consequences are worse, whether it's mental health or physical health. Those consequences are worse for men than for women.
Interesting.
Those effects they're reliable, they're pretty small, but the biggest ones are on the front end, okay? Who is trying to get relationships in the first place? It is men. Men say, I love you first. Men pursue relationships with more gusto and with more enthusiasm. And the reason why, proposed in this paper, isn't the typical sexual selection stuff. I mean, I think that's why this paper is so fascinating. It isn't like, men don't have to invest as much in offspring, and so they are more sort of careless with their sexual pursuits, etc. That isn't the argument in this paper. The argument is men don't have social supports with other men.
Yeah.
Men experience conflict with other men. They get competitive with other men. They don't know how to go to men to find social support, so they seek out without romantic partners, whereas women go to women for more social support. And I just think like that's what's happening in this movie. The Barbies are cool without romantic relationships because they have each other. And meanwhile, the men are flailing around desperately trying to get the Barbies' attention because they actually don't really know how to bond with each other.
What's wild about that paper and everything you just summarized is how much I think it deviates from what we think.
Yeah.
Right? I think the expectation is that women are the ones who are obsessed with romantic relationships, desperate to get into them, very frightened about being lonely about them. Do you have any intuition for why our sort of cultural intuitions here are so off base?
I don't know. I mean, the paper definitely touches on this. I mean, they kind of use that as a framing device, right?
We think that women are the ones who enjoy candlelit dinners or who enjoy romantic movies, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, the evidence for this is just kind of bad. So I really don't know if this is something that changed in the last few decades or if it was never the case. But yeah, it certainly seems like from all of the data on attraction and relationships and health, it's just pretty consistent across the board that these relationships do more for men than for women.
You know, that's interesting. That thesis of, Bob Putnam's Bowling Alone, that in the second half of the 20th century, like societies sort of went away. The Elks Club and these many of them are places where like men hung out with other men, and as those disappeared, maybe the sort of one-to-one relational connections with neighbors or something, like women might be a bit better at that or more inclined toward that, but the broader structures for male friendship might have disappeared, and so there might be something new happening here.
Yeah, it's great stuff. So what do you have in this category?
There's a few things that I think are on point here. It's interesting because this movie isn't foremost about romantic relationships. In fact, that's kind of the point, is that it's really not about that. Nonetheless, I think there are some important insights here. One of the interesting scenes happens near the end. In fact, maybe the most interesting relational scene happens near the end, where Ken has lost his sense of identity. He's realizing that Barbie really doesn't love him, and he doesn't know who he is. And there's this interaction they have where Ken says,
I just don't know who I am without you.
You're Ken.
But it's Barbie and Ken. There is no just Ken. That's why I was created. I only exist within the warmth of your gaze. Without it, I'm just another blonde guy who can't do flips.
He can't do flips.
He can't do flips. It's great, but he doesn't have an identity. And this is a real issue. So what does the research say about people who feel like they don't know who they are? They can't really find a coherent identity where they try to think about it. Well, there is research on this concept called self-concept clarity. Yeah. And some of the most straightforward work on the link between self-concept clarity and relationship well-being comes from Gary Lewandowski and his colleagues, where they just show that people who don't have a strong sense of who they are, people who disagree with items like, I have a clear sense of who I am and what I am, those people tend to be less satisfied in their relationship. And there's some interesting work more recently by Miriam Parise that looks at not only am I less happy if I have less self-concept clarity or I'm more confused about who I am, but also you. So not only does like confusion about my own sense of identity is linked to my own worst relationship quality, but also linked to your feelings of dissatisfaction in the relationship as well.
Yeah. So Barbie is wise to avoid forming a relationship with a Ken who is this confused.
He's got to get it together first. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's really interesting. Okay. Another thing that I really resonate with about this movie is how it sets up this tension between what I'll call some red pill ideas. Now, it has the funny red pill moment with accepting the Birkenstock. I love that. But the movie is also poking holes in some classic red pill ideas about how men can be desirable. And those red pill ideas are things like, well, men, you have to be impressive.
Yeah.
You have to do cool dance moves. Yeah. Right? You have to do flips. You have to show off. That's how you attract women, right? He's really invested in this idea that he's great at doing stuff.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that is what I find so funny about the sequence where they are getting the Barbies away from their Kens.
Yeah.
And President Barbie has been turned, and now she's going to go in and try to help rescue one of the other Barbies. And she walks over to this Ken and says,
Ooh, are you guys watching The Godfather?
The Godfather.
I've never seen it.
Oh my God, you've never seen The Godfather? This movie is a rich blend of Coppola's aesthetic genius and a triumph to Robert Evans and the architecture of the 70s studio system.
Can you start the movie over and just talk through the whole thing?
You have to do it.
So, okay, but this idea that you need to be impressive, okay, and that's how you attract women, that gets so much wrong. And there's something about the Godfather scene in particular where it's like, you can bond over shared interests. But that would require talking to somebody else and learning about them and their interests and not talking over the whole movie. And so I think the movie, by really poking fun at what can be tempting, which is let me show you all this knowledge I have and how very impressive I am. It's kind of revealing that, you know what, if you go in a different direction, if you make it about sharing something you care about, actually that is the way to be appealing and, try to find common ground with somebody.
Yeah, I noticed stuff in this space as well. And the link I had was to pickup culture world.
Yeah, right.
Literally, they talk about this. Like, you should peacock. I mean, this is the instructions to men is to peacock. And it wasn't until watching this movie that I was able to articulate to myself something that was always felt a little off about peacocking, which is that it's the opposite of responsiveness. It's showing off.
Yeah, right.
And I do get it. There's something to be said. Look, I don't think there's enough good research on this for us to know, but there's something to be said for the ability to look impressive and knowledgeable. I do understand where the logic is, but the nature of the peacocking and the way that these Kens are doing it in the form of showing off and lecturing, it's so unresponsive. It's as if the other person is not an individual, but it's just an audience member. It could be any person, and you want to be communicating with this person, and she should be part of the dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, to quote Logan Ury, don't require an audience, be an audience.
That's a great line.
It's a good line. Yeah. And, in terms of the research, I brought up this paper before. I like it a lot. It's by Dr. Tang and colleagues, and it's called Love Me Because I Rely on You.
Yeah.
And it's actually about initial attraction. And what they demonstrate in study after study is that people come across as way more appealing when they actually seem like they need a little help and not when they're like, I have everything under control, I am totally self-sufficient. Like, showing that you're open to something is actually kind of appealing and attractive, even when you're first meeting somebody.
Yeah, I agree. One of the other things that I think the movie gets right, and I don't have a whole lot to say on this because I think it's straightforward, but the movie does a really nice depiction of what a nice apology looks like.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Do you remember this? It's again in that scene at the end where he's really suffering, Ken, and he doesn't know who he is. And he tried patriarchy, but again, when he said when it wasn't about the horses, he lost interest. And he is decent and, tried this stuff, but really he just wanted her, and he doesn't know who he is. And he's crying, right? Because you can only fit 6 beers in that little fridge, and he's just crying about all this stuff. But she eventually says, I'm really sorry I took you for granted. And he's still sniffling and crying, and it settles a bit, and he says, thank you for saying that. And it's that moment when the two of them are together again. The two of them are back on the same team, and there's a situation here that's complicated, and they're working together to resolve the problem. And there is a bunch of literature. I did some work with Peggy Hannon on this a long time ago that looks at, the importance of amends on making relationships better. And what we found is, yes, the conflict can't really get resolved without good amends, effective amends from the person who did the wrong thing. But independent of the quality of the amends is the quality of the forgiveness. And it's really both those things in combination that promote effective resolution of conflict.
That's cool. And this kind of dovetails with one of the other things that I like about this movie that I think this movie gets right, is about the nature of the friendship between Barbie and Ken, our main Barbie and our main Ken.
Yeah.
And what this says about the friend zone. Okay? Like what the friend zone is and how one can navigate it. Now, we've talked a lot on this show about how common the friends to lovers pathway is.
Yeah.
It is the most common way that relationships form. So we cannot fault Ken for being friends with Barbie in the hopes that maybe it would eventually turn into something. But there is another key nugget in that very same paper by Dan Ustinson and colleagues. And what it shows is that, okay, friends to lovers is very common, but in the vast majority of those cases, it's kind of just happening gradually for the two people along the same path. And intentionally trying to traverse the friend zone to successfully woo somebody into a relationship with you, that is a pretty low likelihood strategy. So Ken being friends with Barbie over a long period of time where he is pining for her and he is desperate for her in the hopes that she will one day see him as more than a friend. Again, it's not that that doesn't happen, but that is very uncommon. And I think this is the thing that people often miss about what it is for, mixed gender people who are heterosexual to be friends with each other. Like, yes, often these things do develop into relationships, but it's often kind of when you're not really looking or really paying attention.
Yeah, this idea is really well articulated, I think, in the film. And the narrator says sort of early on, again, the film has to create this world, right? It has to create like what is the feel of the world and who are the people and what are their personalities. And the narrator says, Barbie has a great day every day. Ken only has a great day if Barbie looks at him.
Looks at him, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think what you're saying that is really in the research literature is if you can authentically put some of that romantic craving on the back burner, then hanging out and having fun and being friends is a really good pathway. But if you're so, I guess, obsessed or so lost without the romantic element, there's going to be an inauthenticity to the friends to lovers pathway, and that will make it less likely to work. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. So for heterosexual men, generally speaking, to the extent that they are friends with women, genuinely friends with women, it bodes well for they're less likely to believe hostile sexist beliefs. And actually that bodes well for their romantic prospects down the line. But I think the part that you're getting at that's really important and the tension there is that it has to actually be friends, right? It can't be all friends with ulterior motives because that's going to make you miserable and that's not going to provide, some of the same intergroup contact kinds of benefits.
Yeah, fascinating.
I have one more thing that I think the movie really gets right here, and this is much more in the space of gender rather than gender and relationships and gender and attraction, which is what we've been talking about, but just the idea that women face more penalties for being agentic than men face for being more communal. Another way of saying that is that when you break a gender stereotype, the consequences of that tend to be worse for women than they are for men. And there's a recent review by Erickson and Heilman that goes over all of this. I think one of the really fascinating empirical demonstrations of this idea comes from work by our friend Elizabeth Haynes, who show that, when men are taking their kids to the playground and they're on a work call, that people think oh, what a good dad. He's watching his kids even while he's working. And when people see women doing that, oh man, they do not treat those women well at all. Yeah. So I think that's an example of the things that are articulated many times very well throughout this movie by the America Ferrera character and others is women have to navigate this tension in a way that men really don't. And that's pretty clear in the gender literature.
Yeah, I mean, that does certainly smack of an unfair double standard. Yeah, there is another thing that I think the movie gets right, but I don't think on purpose. And that's basically if you don't prioritize romantic relationships, you're unlikely to find them and sustain them. And
okay.
This, in contrast to most of the movies that we talk about, this one doesn't really have any. I mean, there's Barbie and Ken, but the main lesson there is Ken, stop pining. And then, the America Ferrera character, she has a husband, but he's a pretty trivial contribution to the plot. And certainly everything that we're seeing here is about her relationship with her daughter, not with her husband. And certainly there's nothing in here. There's nothing in this movie to say like romantic relationships are wonderful things and you should try to achieve them. And I think that's right to say, like, if you're viewing those as unimportant, then, you're probably not going to find them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Kens are going to find that their lives improve when they learn how to, like, find social support in each other instead of pining after the Barbies, who do seem to be doing pretty well without them.
Totally.
But tell me about any misconceptions that you flagged in this movie.
Well, at the risk of you saying, wait, didn't you just say the opposite of this? I think one concern I had about the movie, I talked earlier about how, if you have low self-concept clarity, it's hard to build a successful romantic relationship. On the other hand, the movie seems to imply that your identity has to be fully formed before the relationship, which I think seems to imply that you shouldn't allow your partner to change you. Now, again, I don't know. I mean, maybe if Greta Gerwig were here, she would say, I didn't mean to say that, or you're interpreting something that I didn't see. But the story really is like, you need to find who you are before you can be with somebody. And one of the wonderful things about relationships is how they change us, how we take on aspects of our partner's identities. Of course, this is self-expansion theory from Art Aaron, but in all sorts of ways, we learn and we grow and we change. And who the hell wants a relationship that doesn't have that? And who wants to live in a world where your romantic partner doesn't change you in deep, lasting, and meaningful ways?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think we can come away from this thinking that Ken, Ryan Gosling Ken, Beach Ken, is really a mess. And probably needs to spend some time alone on a beach or maybe on a horse or doing his own thing, figure out what he really likes and what he's into before he gets in a relationship. But I agree that is a reasonable read of the movie, and it wouldn't quite match the literature. I get that.
Yeah. I mean, you were totally right that he's not ready to be in a relationship. And yet the extreme on the other end that, you want to be fully formed before you start a relationship. Like I want my wife to change me in meaningful, important ways. And I think she wants the same. And I'm glad that both of us want that.
I really hope Ken goes and runs a stable somewhere. The one small thing that I noticed in this movie that I just wanted to point out, again, it's just a funny line where he asks her to be his long-term distance, low-commitment casual girlfriend, as if that's what men would prioritize. But technically, that is not what men would prioritize. Men prioritize long-term relationships over short-term relationships. Yes. Full stop. There is a difference in the relative weighting of those things between men and women. Mm-hmm. But if I had a number of men in front of me, for every one man that prioritized short-term over long-term, 2 men would prioritize long-term over short-term. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And for women, that ratio is more like 3 to 1, right? Yep. So, but we're kind of talking about the same rough ballpark here. But rarely do men prioritize low-commitment casual girlfriend over the true long-term thing. Again, it's very funny.
He's just trying to practice patriarchy. You're saying he's getting it wrong?
Right. He definitely was getting it wrong. Yeah. Any other misconceptions in here?
Not really. The movie has all sorts of insights, but less focus on the romantic stuff. But talk to me about, like, are you okay with things in this movie? Any sort of moral reactions?
Yeah, I think my main moral reaction is around Alan. Mm-hmm. And the way that character is depicted, again, it's very funny. Michael Cera is doing great work in here. But, you kind of mentioned this earlier, like, he doesn't fit the gender mold very well, and he's kind of left out. Yeah. But that doesn't feel intentional. Mm-hmm. That didn't feel like part of the message. Now the new universe was going to incorporate Alan, to the same level that the various other characters are included. So it just kind of felt like
Alan is a joke, and I get it, and it's very funny, but I didn't love the way that kind of seemed to be tied into, like, you know, being slightly more effeminate or not really fitting the gender mold perfectly.
That's interesting. I had a similar sort of reaction to the Alan character. I don't know what to make of him. He doesn't really have a narrative arc. I'm not sure he's thrilled in Barbie Land. He definitely hates it when it becomes Kendom.
Right.
But there's, like, what's his story? Like, what function does he serve? Is he interested in people who are his friends? He's always off to the side. And I went back and was like, well, okay, let's think of the waves of feminist thought, right? So there was that first wave feminism that, you know, was really early 20th century political rights. In 1920, it got women in America the right to vote and so forth. And then there's second wave feminism. You can think of it as the 60s era feminism about de facto inequalities and those sorts of things. And then, third wave feminism really, in 1990s and so forth, recognizes that, like, well, being a black woman is not the same thing as being a white woman, that there's, like, intersectional aspects here. But fourth wave feminism has a number of elements, but one of them is about trans inclusiveness. Now, I don't think that Alan is trans, but this movie is really a second and third wave feminist movie, and it isn't really clear what it makes of people who don't fall into the binary. So I'm definitely beyond, almost certainly beyond, what Greta Gerwig and her co-author Noah Baumbach were trying to do with Alan.
Yeah.
But I sort of thought, like, in a world where all of the framing is about men versus women, and is there a way for men and women to get along? Like, what happens who don't fit readily into that? And it might look a little like Alan. Not necessarily that they're being actively oppressed, but that there's no real home for them. And Alan feels that way to me.
Right. And I feel like if you push me, again, there's so much of this movie that resonates. There's so much of this movie that is, like, of the moment and today. And if you pushed me to say, what is the part of this movie that might not age as well, I think it would be that. It would
Alan.
be, what are we saying with Alan here?
Yeah. Yeah. I had again, are we okay with this is really, like, what are our moral squeamishness feelings about the movie?
Yeah.
So let me just give a hell yes. So whatever the opposite of are we okay with this, it's like hell yes. You and I watch so many movies that are first and foremost romantic movies, and that makes sense. This is love factually. Yeah. This movie isn't first and foremost a romantic film. It's first and foremost, it's a gender film in terms of the ideas.
Right.
And we have seen so many movies about the importance of just going bigger, right? She says no, you just go bigger. We talk about these as grand romantic gestures. We talk about these as what are you going to say no? And there are 3 different times in the movie, I think, where he tries to kiss her. That is, Beach Ken tries to kiss stereotypical Barbie. And each time she's like, like, not going to do that. And he really does internalize the lesson by the end. He's ashamed of himself. And this idea that, like, if you're just romantic enough or wear the right fur coat or really good with horses, that you can get the girl. And it's like, no, not in this case. Again, I can't say never, but it is a really good antidote to the themes that we see in a lot of these movies, to say sometimes she just doesn't like him, and he needs to accept that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. On some of these red pill ideas we've been talking about, I also really love the inversion, such that blue pill is the world that's very made up, the world that is plastic, the world where you are trying to peacock, essentially, right? I mean, the women's version of peacocking, the high heels, right? Whereas the red pill, the reality is, you do something that's comfortable and you wear the Birkenstocks and you experience the real world and real relationships that way.
Yeah.
And again, what a very smart inversion of a concept that's actually pretty poisonous out there in our culture right now.
Yeah, I mean, the inversions, I really think, are the primary source of intellectual brilliance of the movie. There's a lot of brilliance in the movie, but if we're thinking about the ideas, I mean, some of the ideas and conclusions are actually pretty straightforward, sort of feminist, like feminism 101. But the inversion, the, like, matriarchy of Barbie Land is a really innovative way to illustrate and use satire to talk about the patriarchy. And we see this a bunch of places, like late in the movie when Gloria and Sasha have gone back with Barbie to Barbie Land to counteract the Kens who have, it basically brought patriarchy to Barbie Land. Sasha says, there are Kens too? And Barbie says, there are many Kens. And Sasha says, where do all the Kens live? And Barbie says, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's clear that Greta Gerwig is appalled by the gender hierarchy of Barbie Land. And one thing that I think is really astute about the movie is that the stories that the Barbies are telling themselves is that they solved gender inequality.
Yeah.
But really what they did is they just reversed it. And I think because of how clever Greta Gerwig is in developing this idea and inverting what we know from the real world into Barbie Land, you get to see how these things play out in a way that is, because it's novel and inverted, it brings new insight with it.
Total, absolutely. All right, let's talk quotes. What do you got?
There's so many. I don't know if there's as many relationship quotes. We've already done a bunch. One of the great lines is when the Mattel CEO, the Will Ferrell character, says, no one rests until this doll is back in a box. And of course, they mean the packaging for Barbie. It's not crazy. And by the way, I don't know if you remember this, but this was part of, if you went to see the movie in the theater, you got to pose in a Barbie box. That was one of the things. And I remember my daughter being really into it, right? She's like, get me in the box, right? And then you watch the movie and it's like, obviously, it's a pretty obvious metaphor, but it's pretty compelling. So I like that one. What did you have here?
Okay, I really like the scene. I know this was like in the trailer, but like it's still funny to me. So this is right after one of the first dance sequences. And Ken says,
I thought I might stay over tonight.
Why?
Because we're girlfriend, boyfriend.
To do what?
I'm actually not sure.
Okay. But I just want to draw the parallel back to one of the earlier points about men needing relationships more than women. And it's not necessarily about sex. These people don't even know what it is. And yet he feels drawn to her, right? He feels very compelled to be around her.
Yes.
That, I think, is reflecting something real that men feel. And even if you have no idea what sex is, that pull is still there. So I love how that quote makes that point.
Yeah. There's one other one that I love. It's not really relationship-y, but the part where he's determined to go with Barbie back to real world. And so he sneaks into the back of her car. And she discovers him eventually because he starts singing along to Closer to Find with her.
Of course.
Yeah, and of course. And then eventually she's basically like, no, I'm doing this by myself. And he says, what if there's beach there? You're going to need someone who's a professional in that. And I just love Ken and he's about beach and he's all in and he's very proud of himself.
Any other quotes?
There's one other one that I flagged here that I'd love to share with you. So this is the conversation that Barbie and Gloria are having about the nature of change and how Barbie was happy with the way things were and she just doesn't want anything to change. And she says,
no, I didn't wish anything. I've never wanted anything to change.
Oh, honey, that's life. It's all change.
That's terrifying.
I love that idea. I love this idea that like you can't really expect permanence. Things do change. You can't expect perfection. Imperfection is part of life. And it does harken back to some of the interesting ideas in relationship science. One of the harmful ideas that's been identified in the field is this idea of perfection, right? That I should be expecting that we'll have this stable excellence. And if there's conflict, we end up having real difficulty. So they're not talking exactly about relationships here, but it's a good illustration of why it's important to be accepting of the fact that difficulty arises. Great times do end, and hopefully they'll come again, but there's fluctuation in those things.
It's sort of relevant to this idea, too, that any given relationship, if it lasts for a very long time, is actually kind of like 5 relationships, right? Like you will reinvent that relationship in different stages of your life to match the moment, to match the stressors, to match the responsibilities, to match where you are, and that's sometimes hard for people to wrap their heads around.
It's not the way we think about it. We think about till death do you part, and that implies one thing. But it also, as you're talking, this also brings back the idea we talked about earlier of, well, you have to be fully developed and only then start the relationship because that's you in perpetuity. It's like, no, you're changing, they're changing, the relationship is changing, and how are you going to keep making it work over time? That's the real question.
Well, what do we wish we knew about relationships or attraction? And are there questions that this movie inspires for you?
Yeah, I have a couple. One of them is related to this idea of peacocking. We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
You and I share the intuition that this is not a good idea. That said, I don't think there's good research on this. So if
fair enough.
Yeah, like if we imagined a study where, in one condition people have a conversation and in the other condition they're told, have a conversation and then do something that you think makes you look awesome. Does the girl like the guy more? Again, we'll assume the gendered roles here. Does the girl like the guy more in the no peacocking condition versus the peacocking condition? I really do not know.
I mean, the evidence is pretty good that confidence is appealing. And it's actually equally appealing for men and women.
Yes.
And there's even some experimental data showing that if you the experiments are with men, but there's no reason to believe that this would not work equally well with women. Yeah. That if you boost men's confidence, they will then be more romantically appealing when they meet people face to face. But confidence is not the same thing as playing guitar at somebody.
Well, let me ask you, that work, I'm not familiar with the work, or at least I don't recall it. Do they know what men who are feeling more confident are doing? Like, are they peacocking more, or are they, because they feel secure in themselves, they don't feel a need to do that, and so they're asking more sensitive questions? Do we have any inkling about that?
So it's fascinating because what this procedure does is it basically helps men learn how to be better conversation partners.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, here's how you ask questions of another person. Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's how you get them to talk more, and here's how you use humor. Okay.
I love it.
And what's also interesting, too, is that this boosts a number of the men's attributes. They're then perceived as more confident, but also more dominant, more high status. But the women only like them more because of the confidence.
Oh, fascinating.
Right? It's the confidence that's doing it. So I think what's happening in these videos, again, I'm not totally sure, but I sense it's actually the opposite of peacocking. And it's what we were talking about earlier. It's like, don't talk over the entirety of The Godfather. Try to use it to connect to her interests.
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking about what we wish we knew, and it's easy to imagine the study, right? So one condition does this. Right. It says, here's how to be a sensitive conversation partner, and another one says, make sure you use this time on your date to demonstrate your most impressive attributes. And then you could have a control condition, and it would be really interesting to see how those three conditions compare to one another.
And I just want to say, because another fascinating way that the movie brings this in is that they change all the radio stations and stop playing the Indigo Girls and the other songs that the Barbie's and just play Matchbox 20.
I wanna push you around.
Connect to her interests.
Yeah. It's perfect.
All right, what else do you have here?
There's one other, there's a lot of research on intra-sexual competition, right? So that is men competing with men to try to get women, and women competing with women to try to get men. And you really see a great example between the two primary Kens, right? Beach Ken and rival Ken.
Yeah.
And they're trying to beat each other off, and they're being like, look, Barbie, watch me. And they're trying to, surf and so forth. But I just don't really know the circumstances under which competition of this sort looks impressive versus ridiculous.
Yeah,
I don't know that the literature has been clear enough on when winning a dominance display against someone of your same gender makes you more or less appealing to people of the other major gender. It's not clear to me.
Yeah. I totally grant that there could be times when it looks good, but a lot of times then you look not sort of confident like a good conversation partner. You just kind of look like a jerk.
Embarrassing. Yeah.
On this podcast, we rate movies from 1 to 5 stars. And for me, Barbie is a 4-star movie. It's an absolute delight. It's hilarious every time. And I think the messages are great, and it's pretty much a blast. So where are you with Barbie?
I also gave this a 4-star rating. I think I had more ambivalence in my rating than you voiced there. The movie's a little cluttered and confused. So there's one part sort of early on where one of the Barbies says, in our assessment, money is not speech, and corporations have no free speech rights to begin with, and goes on from there about turning democracies into plutocracies. And I get it, and I get why, the viewers of this movie, people who like this movie, might also agree with that sentiment, but that's not exactly clear what it's doing there.
Yeah.
That said, the movie is hilarious, and we've only talked a little bit about the bravura filmmaking of Greta Gerwig. So I've talked a little bit about the cheeky references to classic films, not only the stiletto Birkenstock thing from The Matrix, but there's also this big opening homage to Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, a great reference to the I Could Have Been a Contender speech from On the Waterfront, the shirtless scene, the volleyball scene from Top Gun. I could go on and on.
Singing in the Rain?
Singing in the Rain, it's there. I think there's at least a dozen of these. And it's just a movie made by a masterful craftsperson. So I generally massive credit where it's due. It's a 4-star film ultimately to me.
All right, we also rate movies on Rust Bolts. Now, the Rust Bolt is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Carol Rust Bolt, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near-perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. So, Eli, where do you land on Rust Bolts for Barbie?
Well, if what we're talking about here about close relationships is romantic relationships, I'm giving this one 2. And I think it might be on a curve. I think you saw more in here than I did. Look, the film gets a lot of things right. I don't think the major things it gets right is how to have a good relationship. In a way, it's not fair to critique the film for failing to show that. That's not what the movie tried to do. Yeah. That said, I didn't see a whole lot here about best practices, although there are some useful flags for worst practices like the peacocking guitar stuff.
So, it's interesting. I landed at 3 Rust Bolts for this movie because I just think it has profound things to say about attraction and gender and a lot of the early stage relationship stuff. But of course, there are no ongoing relationships in here, so I really can't in good conscience go too much higher than that. But I'm going to invent a new category right now, and that category is the Eggly, named after one of my other advisors, Alice Eggly, pioneer of gender research.
5.
And on a scale of 1 to 5, this gets 8. And so that is all we have for today. This has been the Love Factually podcast. I am Paul Eastwick. I have been here with Eli Finkel. And Eli, I will see you next time.
I look forward to it. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker & Sons. To learn more about the research we discussed in this episode, find the notes on our Substack. That's lovefactually.substack.com. Okay, today we have some fun bonus content. I woke up this morning and I mentioned to Nora that I had just watched the video for Billie Eilish's song, What Was I Made For? And that I was doing it in advance of recording this episode for the Barbie movie. And she said, can I say something about what that movie means to me? And then she spent about an hour writing it. And here is Nora Finkel, my 15-year-old daughter.
Hi. The reason why the Barbie movie is so important to me, as a 15-year-old girl, is I've grown up with Barbie and her "you can be anything" message. I used to play with the dolls as a kid. I watched all of the 2000s Barbie movies on DVD growing up. I have grown up with Barbie, and it's very important to me. And I was so excited for this movie to come out, and I was just blown away. When I was sitting in that theater surrounded by women of all ages, and my dad and my brother were there too, but it was mostly women in that theater, and it was so empowering to me. But the thing that sticks with me the most about this movie is America Ferrera's speech about how hard it is to be a woman. I think that if girls grow up hearing that, they'll feel less alone. And I think that that is the entire point of the Barbie movie.